Oh, sorry. Hello, this is me, Hong Yao Wu again, or you can call me as Isaac. So today, this is gonna be I wouldn't say it's too long, but a relatively simple, easy video on the 5 W's of being an interpreter, especially in a Australian context, which is me, a natty certified interpreter. So we're going to talk about the who are we, what we do, why we're here, and then where do we go, and how do we become who we are, and how do we do work, of course. So let's get into the topic. Now, first of all, interpreter. If you watch my previous video, you know what we do. Okay, so what we do is once again we have a recap. We have source text, we have the target text, source language, target language. Two languages that are different from each other, and then there are two different people who speak this two different language. They try to communicate, and they have trouble getting it. So this is the time where an interpreter comes in. An interpreter, as us, who we are. We firstly, the basic is we do understand both language. In my case, Chinese or Mandarin versus English. So we understand these two languages. That's the first thing. You need to understand the two languages or multiple languages sometimes to be an interpreter. So does it mean that everyone who are bilingual will be able to become an interpreter? A lot of people might think so. Let me start with a live example of myself. Um, that was back in 2008, I think. Yeah, 2007 or 8 when it was the Beijing Olympic. And back then I was a citizen of China where I was born. And I wanted to be a volunteer for that big, almost once in a lifetime event, the Beijing Olympic. Okay. So there's one thing they're trying to get volunteer for these events. So one of the skill sets that you're supposed to be put in is your language skill. Okay, your language skill. Then, of course, I will write English, I will write Mandarin, Cantonese, a bit of Vietnamese, and then there's one part where you have to click on it. It says, "Do you have the ability to interpret?" So this the point where the first time the concept of interpreting comes into my life. Back then was only like what 19 years old. Okay, so we tend to think that if I of a different background that is different from an English background and I understand that language, I can be an interpreter. Unfortunately, this is not who we are, and this is not the case. To be an interpreter, it is not enough that you only understand the two languages. It is the basic. However, you need to possess a certain skill, such as short-term memory. For some people, they can speak both language, but whether they can remember what others said simultaneously or during a conversation where someone tell you something and you have trouble remembering. Could be my problem as well. When someone speaks for more than 2 or 3 minutes, you tend to lost along the way, so you don't really understand, the whole story. So if you do understand two languages, but you do not have the memory capacity to do it, so you can't really, grasp the meaning, and then of one person, remember it in your head, transfer it into a different language, and usher it in the other language. So to able to remember, able to jot down the key points, the main idea, this is something that we need to be possess. This is a skill that we need. Okay, without such, no matter how fluent you are in either of the language or both languages, you are not able to perform well. And secondly, so we often say that we always say a interpreters is different from a bilingual speakers. Okay, so who we are not someone who only speaks two languages. We need to go through several trainings, note-taking skills, social skills, cultural skills, background skills. Those things you need. You have to understand cultures. Okay, something that might sound a little bit, it sounds completely fine in one of the culture, may be very offensive in the other culture. So this is something pretty common. Is when I met two clients, one from China and one from Australia, and especially some of the someone from a previous generations who's been in China for many years who come over here. Once they chit chat for about an hour or two, they will ask, "So what's your salary?" Okay, so how much do you make per month? If you do that to any adult person or any sensible person in Australia who were born here, despite their background, probably you will find a very awkward moment. So you have to understand this culture. This is just one of the examples. Okay, as Westerners, we tend to be they tend to be straight. They tend to go straight to the questions, whereas Oriental people, they try to be, they might want to go around the questions. This is they don't want to go straight to the point. They tend to talk about the backgrounds a lot. So when I used to interpret over the phone, for example, it's between a Chinese speaking customer and a Aussie, customer service person, who they talk to each other. This customer service was basically asking, okay, so when do you want to move into your property? This is from one of the energy company. Okay, so they said, when do you want to move into the premise? So then they will know when to start the service. And then the other person, they would begin to say that, oh, I currently live in A, and my rent is going to expire soon, and then my lease is going to expire soon, and then I will have to move because of A, B, C, and we are going to we're going to move in after A, B, C, D, E, and then we will be moving to this place for a couple nights as a transaction period, and then eventually we'll be moving to the new address in whatever day. So a very simple question. If you're a Westerner, you probably would think that, when are you going to move into the premise? Maybe 1st of May. That's it. A 1 second answer. However, in some culture, i.e., like Chinese culture, they like to tell you the story. It might sound very funny, but it does. That's why they do. So you or me as an interpreter, I need to have this not just bilingual, but bicultural context. If you don't have this sort of skills, you will get lost. You will probably cause a lot of confusion. If you don't understand that, okay, so my client A is trying to know a date, and my client B is trying to explain himself or herself in a cultural context, you might get overwhelmed. A lot of customer service person, they actually had to cut me off when I interpret, because they don't understand this cultural context. They think that, well, did you interpret my question properly? I was asking, when are you moving into a property? I didn't say that when you were there, or how much longer are you going to stay in your current property. So this is a cultural issue that, as an interpreter, you probably should understand. Okay, this is so back to what I was talking about in the beginning. As a so-called volunteer for Beijing Olympic Game, you probably don't have such cultural understanding. Given that I was only 19 years old, so I lived with my parents back then. I only stay in a few countries, and then I left China long ago. So I probably couldn't do it properly, and I need to go through all this training. So go through training. You heard the keywords. So how do you go through the training? In Australia, for example, there are two pathways. Okay, first of all, of course, you can go to the NATI, which known as the National Accreditation Authority of Translators and Interpreters. This is believe it or not, a private entity that is responsible for issuing of all the accreditation, now known as certification for translators and interpreters. You need to go through them. Okay, how do you become that? You need to go through the tests. Of course, you need to pass the test, and then you have to go through the test, including it includes a cultural part. It includes I'll ask you questions similar in your culture. What will you do in the Australian culture? What will you do? And more importantly, they will ask you ethical questions. Ethical question. I remember this one very common one is after you finish working or interpreting in a hospital, would you be? And then there was an elderly lady, and they were asking, "Will you be able to drive me home? I don't live far away from here. And what would you do?" And then, of course, I'm not going to tell you the answer, but back then, I just basically say that I have to be impartial. I'm not siding with this elderly lady. I'm not siding with the hospital. I'm neutral. Okay, so this is one of the ethical or cultural question you have to ask. So you have to understand. You have to be bicultural, bilingual at the same time, because in Chinese culture, you were providing a service to someone, and they probably think that have giving an elderly lady a free lift home not far away, this is considered almost, I wouldn't say an obligation, but at least it is acceptable. However, in a natty context, you are jeopardizing your impartialities. So you shouldn't do that. So now this is it. So as an interpreter, it's not enough to only speak two languages. You need to understand various things. Okay. And now I once saw a video where they draw about what, who, how, but why do we need an interpreter? I think I briefly mentioned it in my last video. Why? Because in Australia, for example, the constitutions mandate that everyone, every single person, you may be a citizen, you may be a permanent resident, you may be any person in this country, you are entitled to a fair go. You should have fair access to all the service and all the help whenever you need it. So, one of the barrier of fair go or equalities is that you have language barriers. So why are we here? So Australian government, they were thinking, there are millions of Australians. They are either born overseas or just recently migrate to Australia. They don't speak much English. And for a lot of my clients, they speak no English at all. Believe it or not, a lot of them can't even pronounce A, B, C, D, E properly. So these people, they are disadvantaged because they don't understand English, and they cannot express themselves in an English environment. So this is how an interpreter is required. So they need to have someone who can help to bridge this communication gap between the non-English speakers and the mainstream English society, which provides service, products, and help to them. Okay, so this is the core reason. A fair go, a just society, and to ease the access to service and help in the community. This is the reason that interpreters exist, and that's how we exist. Okay, give you an example. If someone at your family, they all of a sudden had a heart attack, right? You try to put in the medications, and then you need to send them to hospital as soon as possible. You pick up 000. Hi, I need I'll take my dad to the hospital as soon as possible, but you don't speak English. What do you do? So in 000, if you are able to speak, like for example, Chinese or Spanish or Italian, let them know they can actually direct you to an interpreter. And this interpreter is time where it becomes life-saving, because only this interpreter will understand the language that this patient speaks or the family speaks, so that they can convey what exactly is going on in the emergency situation. And then through the interpreter, the 000 staff will be able to tell them, oh, here's what you should do. If he's bleeding, well, put some cloth on him, or you need to do this to him, that to him. And without an interpreter, you can be the best customer service person from 000. And maybe the person who's calling, this non-English speaker, NES, as what we refer them to as, they're a totally smart person. They can do whatever, but they just don't understand. So at this time, this is why we need an interpreter. An interpreter is the time where it comes in and bridge this language gap where you can understand, receive instruction from English and then convey the instruction to the non-English language so that this communication bridge can be, established and bridge the gap. Okay, so this is why. And then we talk about briefly how. Look, recently Natty has went through quite a bit of reform about how do they, um, and back then was a provide accreditation, now certification to interpreters. So of course, the straight answer is you go and take a test from Natty, and before that, you can go through all the training. There are a lot of institutions around Melbourne. They are private. You can go pay a bit of money. They will guide you through a 12 weeks, sometimes 9 to 15 weeks sort of course about all the details. You can do that, and then you will understand all the cultural aspect, or the professional aspect, and the ethical aspect of being an interpreter. Of course, the language aspect, such as note-taking skills, short-term memory skills, and all kind of things like this. And practice. Practice always makes perfect. So when you're alone, you probably are not too motivated on practicing your interpreting skill. But when you're in a group, you can definitely go through a lot more practice. Not only with an instructor, also between amongst your mates, where you can just one person can be pretending to be the non-English speaker, one person to be the English professional, and you will be the interpreter. So this practice makes it perfect. So this actually applied to interpreting profession as well. So this is how. Once you do all the practice, you need to sit a exam, which is facilitated by NATI, the National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters. So they will put you into a test, and they will go through all the procedures where you will have to face uh, a person, a staff who speaks English, a staff who speaks your language, and you sit between them, and they will be cases where they will pretend to be, for example, in the hospital, in a police station, with legal aid lawyers, and they will just go by just exactly like how everyday users are doing. And you, as an interpreter, first you need to understand the source language and the target language. You need to convey the message. And of course, they will make your life difficult by they might be speaking really fast, they might be speaking very soft, they might be making some noise, there may be some confusions, they might be speaking for really, really long, and they are testing you how you deal with this kind of situation. And once you are able to prove to Natty and show that you're able to handle all these situations, then and you're able to accurately convey the message and facilitate communication, then you'll be able to get your Natty accreditation. Uh, and they were asking you ethical questions. There are some obvious things, you should confidentiality. That's a big one. Okay, if you interpret for one of the client, such as a suspect with his lawyer, okay, you sit there and then the lawyers and the suspect were talking about what are the options. Should they plead guilty, not guilty? What might happen? You interpret for them. Okay, a lot of non-English speaking client they hire either legal aid or a lawyer who speaks English only. So you have to interpret for them. And later when you get out, now you assume that the police constable or sergeant, they won't come and ask you what did they say. No, they won't. But anyone, could be your family, could be a friend, could be someone who know this person and ask you about, okay, so what did they say? For the So as an interpreter, you need to understand. Rule of thumb is you need to adhere to the principle of confidentiality. What you hear, what they say, stay in the room, unless you got prior authority to you were previously authorized to expose or to actually convey some of the information to others. which almost never happen. You should always keep it to yourself. In fact, I always tell myself whenever I work for police or hospital settings, I will tell myself that once I get in, I interpret what I say. Once I walk out, I don't remember what it said. Okay, and this could be problematic because what we do is like nowadays it's during pandemic, so I'm more free to give you this video. But um, in normal time, we will have to go through dozens, if not hundreds of interpreting on-site jobs and telephone jobs a week. So it could be quite challenging. You're not able to remember everything you said throughout this period. And there were cases where police came up with me and tell me that, okay, so you interpret for us about a year and a half ago in a police setting where we interviewed a suspect, and then he was saying that, oh, there wasn't an interpreter present, and he was forced to admit to what the police were suspecting due to the fact that there isn't an interpreter. So if that's truly the case, that will be simply against the relevant regulations and laws in Australia, which protects individual rights. So this could be the case where the police will ask you to write a statement about what you have done. And come on, that was more than a year and a half ago. So you have to think back, and you need to talk to the police constable, and you probably will take you a few minutes to remember what exactly going on. Well, so yeah, what exactly was going on? So you have to write down. That happens to me once. Okay, I have to write a statement and send to the police and talk about I was there. Of course, you don't have to write the details. I was there on approximately early afternoon. I was there seeing the constable and the suspect. I provided an interpreting service, and everything was going fine. There was, of course, that sneaky man didn't ask for me to interpret for most of the case, only a few words. So it could be tricky. But yeah, these are some small things that may happen, but this is not part of your job. Okay, you supposedly, as an interpreter, you don't have to be stressed about that. But of course, this thing may happen. Of course, you can tell when it's needed. So when, I give you a when. Okay, 5 Ws. When do you need it the most? Of course, medical case, when a patient don't understand English, so they need to check out their conditions and diseases, they need an interpreter. A police case, someone was maybe a victim of family violence and they need to give a statement to the police and they don't understand English. Someone may be a suspect of doing something. I interpret for a lady who was suspect of murder. Okay, the police suspect that she pushed someone from out the balcony of a really tall building. So the police will have to ask her, okay, so what were you doing? Did anyone see what you did? Could you, give us more details? Did you have any, argument or any previous alteration with the victim or whatever? And then that kind of case where if a person don't speak much English, then you need an interpreter to help out, right? So we talk about, and then, so now this is basically a brief idea of how to become an interpreter. What do you need to do, and what's the differences between bilinguals and a proper interpreter? And all in all, interpreting is not just someone who understands two languages. You need to understand the language. You need to have the cultural background, the ethical understandings of the ethical understanding of all the backgrounds about confidentiality, professionalism, and you need to know about how to properly deal with different tricky situations that involves conflicts of interest. This could be something that you need to understand. So you have to do all this homework and prepare yourself before you really get into interpreting and translating. And in translating as well, it may sound less simultaneous events, but sometimes when you're translating, It could be a contract, could be thousands of pages of confidential documents, and you don't want to end up breaching confidentialities and telling the competitor with this, and someone might bribe you for this. Okay, and so these are confidentialities. If someone pays you already as your client to translate the document, suppose once you translated it, you cannot tell anyone else about the content of this document. And of course, you cannot use this to your own advantage. I know this may sound a little bit difficult to deal with, especially I once saw a video which I was going through training at RMIT University where an interpreter was interpreting for a real estate agent. And then the real estate agent was talking about the value of the property, the prospect of the property, and how cheap the property is. It's a great deal. But the interpreter wants to buy it, and then he just interpreted it, in a funny way. Oh, this building is going to collapse, and the government was saying that this is one of the most dangerous suburbs in Melbourne, and then also there is some problem with the soil here, and we are here as asking someone to do us a favor or a favor of buying this place, and which is completely nonsense and just outright lying. And when the two parties, the real estate agent and your overseas client, they don't understand each other, and they are putting their interest, their stake on you. So this is the ethical part, which you will slowly understand it will be mentioned again and again and again and again that ethics, confidentialities, right, professionalism, these are the things that needs to be, once again, we'll mention it over and over. So this is the part where it gets tricky. This is the part where it might bring you into trouble. So you gotta understand that. And as back to my first case, as a volunteer in Beijing Olympic, you will never expect to get into something like this. Okay, so yeah, for example, Sun Yang's case from China, he was just a swimmer. What if in an Olympic game, this athlete here, they suppose that they should go through some testing, okay, testing on the drug, but they don't. Maybe one of them, they don't understand Chinese, or somehow the relevant authority, they only ask someone who speaks Chinese to conduct the test, and then you as a volunteer who does not possess the vocabulary background, the lexicons of all these jargons. Secondly, you don't have the training and background on how to be impartial, how to be, how to react to various situation and even crisis. And number three, you may break confidentiality. You say, "Oh no!" You tell your parents, you tell all your friends, you post it on your WeChat saying that I've interpreted with for Sun Yang today. It was cool, and what he said was, and what happened was, and that basically ruins the whole thing. In court case, if you do that, which believe it or not, professional interpreters does this before. Okay, in the case of I forgot what his name is, just one of the Chinese actors who was accused of rape in Melbourne, and then he was in a court case, and then they went through this court case, all the everything, all the procedures, and then the interpreters who happens to be interpreting for this famous actor from China, he actually exposed and let out of what he heard in the court procedure. So everyone knows about it, and then by this is then it breaks the relevant confidentiality requirements, and the whole case have to restart because of this one interpreter who somehow, I would even say stupidly, trying to breach the confidentialities criteria of ethics. So without proper training, and sometimes even with the proper training, we all have weakness. We might be still tempted to do things that we shouldn't be doing. Therefore, As an interpreter, you have to go through enough trainings, and you need to go through all the understanding of the ethical and cultural part of being an interpreter. So that's how we were told that we need to be bilingual, bicultural, and ethically aware. So this is what you really need to do before becoming an interpreter. So yeah, so having said all this, you're all free to start from today. If you're interested in this career, feel free to read about it, to check out what exactly is required, and slowly you may be able to prepare yourself to be an interpreter like me, as well, a community interpreter. So I hope you are happy with this, and if this inspires you to be a future interpreter, you're more than welcome. Although this is a very competitive industry, there are a lot more supply than demand. However, the nature of this job is we are not working for one company. We are almost like a group of individuals that we don't really band with each other a lot. Like nowadays, it is the pandemic. Even before the pandemic period, we don't see each other that often. So we don't work in the same company. We don't work in the same cohort. So if you're interested, come and join us. And I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of you who are, you know, uh, who have great understanding of all this ethical and professional aspect of life. You may have a legal background, like some of my friend who does and became an interpreter, and that's absolutely fine. And you're more than welcome to comment and let me know about what you think about my understanding of ethics and cultural and linguistic knowledge that is required of an interpreter. So thank you very much for today, and stay safe.